G'day guys and welcome to this business management lesson. In today's lesson we're looking at key knowledge point 112. That is unit 1, area of study 1, and the second key knowledge point for this area of study. Today specifically we're looking at the personal motivations behind why someone might start a business. Helpfully, this key knowledge point lists a few different areas that personal motivations might come from, and these are the ones we're going to have to talk about. I have reworded them slightly to make sure that our understanding is nice and clear. The study design lists the desire for independence, the potential for wealth and financial independence, the desire to fill an identified gap in a market, and the desire to fulfill a social need. Now, the desire for independence generally describes being your own boss. Being a business owner means that you have the control, the authority, and the ability to make decisions around all sorts of things, including when and where you work. Perhaps you've got young kids, and so you want to be available to do the school drop-off and pick-up. If you're your own boss, you could work before in the early morning, you could work in the middle of the day, you could work in the evening, you could work overnight. If you're your own boss, nobody's going to stop you. If you're your own boss, you can work in your pajamas, you can work in overalls, you could work in a suit, you could hire an office in the city, or you could work from your farmhouse out in the country. Nobody else is telling you how to do things. You're your own boss. That's what the desire for independence describes. More than that, being your own boss means that you don't have to ask permission from a boss, because you're your own boss. And in many cases, in many industries, people will run into challenges or have problems to solve and overcome. And in many cases, a boss will tell an employee how to overcome that problem or how to solve that challenge. If you're your own boss, you're free to innovate. You're free to explore your own solutions. You're free to exercise, freedom, really. And that is very attractive to a number of people. That might be why someone would want to start a business, to be their own boss. The desire for independence. Similarly, the desire for financial independence, the desire for wealth, and certainly the potential for wealth. If you have a boss, if you have an employer, you'll be paid as much as that employer chooses to give you. However, if you start a successful business, you have the opportunity to make money for yourself. Now, even the most successful businesses tend to lose money in the early days. When businesses are getting started up and they require the most investment, business can be difficult. However, once a business gets through those early days and starts to become successful, businesses can generate a lot of money. Look at the biggest household brands, Disney, Google, Apple. These businesses are generating a huge amount of money. If you're the person who started a business like that, you're likely to find yourself in a position where you become incredibly wealthy. Because if a business that you own is making profits, you're entitled to at least some of that, and the more profits it's making, the more wealthy you might become. And certainly, having that option, being able to pursue wealth by starting a business, is a very attractive prospect and might be the motivation that drives someone to entrepreneurship. Now, we talked a little bit in key knowledge point 111 about gaps in the market, and it might be that you've identified a gap in the market, that you've had an idea for a business. Certainly, you're sitting in your school right now thinking, I'd really like an ice cream after school. And if it just happens to be that there aren't any stores or locations around your school where someone could buy an ice cream quickly and easily and conveniently, and if you're convinced that you can't be the only person who wants an ice cream, there must be more than one person sitting here who would like an ice cream, then you've had an idea for a business. You've identified a gap in the market. Currently, ice creams aren't available. If you made them available, you think people would buy them. There you go. That's an idea for a business. Perhaps that idea really appeals to you. It really tickles you. You think you have a red hot go at making a success of that idea. Well, that could be the source of motivation that drives you to being an entrepreneur. Identifying a gap in the market and having a desire to fill that gap in the market. This photograph and that link describe some people who were vegetarians, perhaps some of them still are vegetarians in the United States, who invested their resources and their efforts into becoming butchers. They became vegetarians because they had problems with the way that industrial agriculture treats animals, and that's why they stopped eating meat. They didn't want to be customers of those industries, and instead they opened butchers' shops and farms and set up a supply chain where animals are treated much, much better. And they describe themselves as ethical butchers, and they provide ethical meat products. It's a really interesting case study in someone identifying a gap in the market for ethical meat products and investing significant effort and resources into making that a reality. And of course, maybe it's you've identified a social need that you could bring to market. Now, if a market need is the provision of goods or services that people would buy if it was made available to them, a social need is the provision of goods or services that will improve the quality of life for people in society. They're not the same thing. One example of a market need might be a new pair of shoes, some fancy Nike things that dropshippers get excited about. I'm not really a shoe person. That's a terrible example. But a social need is much simpler, much more easy to identify when we're talking about a social need. An example of a social enterprise that fulfills a social need is Thank You. They sell bottles of water and nappies and body wash, and they generate profit that way. That's just bringing products to market. That's filling a market need. But then they take those profits and they invest those profits into providing clean drinking water and sanitary arrangements in communities that don't have access to those things already. That's a social need. If you're providing clean drinking water to communities that don't have it and you're not charging them for it, that's fulfilling a social need. And perhaps being able to do that is your motivation for starting a business in the first place. Certainly, there are all sorts of reasons that social enterprises get started, and typically the motivations behind starting a social need will fall into one of these groups. The provision of employment training or support for disadvantaged groups who don't already have access to that kind of employment training or support. To meet a community need by producing products that aren't currently produced because they're not profitable. Things like off-road wheelchairs or accessible technology, gaming technology, or perhaps, well, there are infinite examples. But typically, big businesses tend not to introduce products or bring products to market if those products have a very small potential market. And small markets typically exist when we're talking about people with physical or mobility issues and challenges. So certainly social enterprises do tend to crop up to meet the needs of those people. Another example is businesses that crop up to bring products to market in an environmentally sustainable manner or in a more ethical manner, such as the vegetarians who became ethical butchers, and certainly to generate profits for redistribution to social initiatives or to charities, much like Thank You does with their efforts. Now, in summary for this key knowledge point, not all entrepreneurs have the same reasons for starting a business, but typically the desire for independence, the potential for wealth, and the desire for financial independence, to fill a gap in the market that they've identified, or to fulfill a social need, are going to describe one or more of the motivations of the vast majority of entrepreneurs. You need to know what these terms mean. You need to be able to describe them in order to demonstrate competency in this area of study. That's all for today. See you next time.